Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to have with us an expert in power systems, a young expert, of course. Right now, we have with us Aarish. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Aarish.
Thank you so much, Professor Mathur. So, hi everybody, anyone who would be listening to this program eventually when it's uploaded. My name is Arish, and I'm a power engineer. I've done my bachelor's and master's degree. I've got my bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering. My master's degree was in power systems, where I tried to look at some computational aspects or renewable power systems. Um, I have some field experience. I've worked as a junior engineer in my local electrical utility in the province of Kashmir. Uh, for the last 6 odd years, I've been working as a faculty member of the Department of Electrical Engineering. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been pursuing my PhD in electrical power systems with special area of research being power system economics. Not exactly, it's more interdisciplinary from IIT Bombay. So, why did I choose this path? I mean, I mentioned that I worked as a field engineer. So when I worked as a field engineer, this was way back in 2017. Yeah, 2017. Um, at that time, I had no idea whatsoever. I didn't want to pursue higher studies, or didn't I? I had no inkling about economics. It's not typically taught in our undergraduate or, for that matter, even postgraduate programs. Uh, but when I worked in the field, I mean, in the actual got my hands dirty in a manner of speaking, I could see that more than any technical intervention, the thing that really ails our, at least the power department that I was working in, the major issue has to do with personnel, has to do with policy, has to do with the incentive structures that are built into it. To give an example, so I don't want to go into specifics. I hope no one sues me or something.
Yeah.
Uh, So one of our senior engineers, he was on the verge of retirement, and he was a decent guy. But I observed that he would almost unthinkingly, without thinking that it's untoward or something that you ought not to do, he would quote unquote misuse the official vehicle. He would use it to drop off his daughter-in-law to the boutique, or to pick up his grandchildren from the school. Something as simple as that. I mean, it's something unthinking. And when I asked around, he was not the only one to do it. Everyone did it. Everyone did it. And so I was a young idealistic guy. So I innocently asked him that, okay, this is something that has been given to us by the taxpayers. It is supposed to be utilized for official purposes. It's not to be utilized for these, petty things. No reply. As if I felt I was talking to a wall. As if, you know, they took me to be some kind of a troublemaker. And then I looked at other things as well. So in terms of personnel deployment, now my state's power utility is one of the most bankrupt in financially bankrupt in India. For the listeners, and those especially who are working in power sector industry in economics, they would recognize that we have something known as a discom, a distribution company.
Yeah.
uh, they are responsible for the distribution of power. They're basically the people that you interface with.
Yes.
a, a layman doesn't know what's transmission, doesn't know what's generation,
Yeah.
but the people, the personnel, the transformers that you see, the lines that you see, the cables that you see, the the person that you call if there is a fault or something, that's basically the distribution company. Now, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, they are totally bankrupt in India. They don't, in the case of my state, uh, the kind of revenue that they could generate was insufficient to even pay the committed expenditure of, you know salaries, pensions, and insurance, and other things that you just have to do to maintain your existing infrastructure. This is not something that you learn in engineering school. There you are lost in, abstract mathematics, or then you can switch over to some practical things. So you would a faculty member would adumbrate, upon, say, the structure of an electrical machine, but they would never mention the economics of this. Why do we go for AC generation as opposed to DC generation? It's not
mm,
something that we were taught.
mm,
It's something that I picked up on my own when I read some articles and some
mm,
research papers.
mm.
Uh, it is a technical thing, but ultimately the governing influence is economics. You can't have, in the olden days, in the 19th century, um, DC generation has a technical issue. It can't operate at a high voltage.
Yes.
If you operate it at a low voltage, at least that's before the advent of these modern day rectification equipment. Let's not go into technical details. Um, uh, to supply the same amount of power, you require an enormous amount of current if you're operating at low voltages. That in turn imposes a very hard upper limit on the distance to which you can transmit power.
Yeah.
Uh, go back go back from these technical things. When we recruit engineers, or we deploy engineers, or we decide their transfer and posting policy, it's not rational, at least in my experience of the state power sector and what I've heard from other people working in any states. I mean, it's not specific to my state. To in anyone working any government power, or for that matter any government owned utility or government owned company, it may not even be power engineering related. It's not,
Mm,
I mean, the incentive structures are all for enormous wastage, s- declaration of nonsensical plans of augmentation, and you know some minister or some bureaucrat comes up with some fancy idea of, okay, I'm going to place a substation in some place, in some god's forsaken place where there is no demand,
mm,
whereas they would completely neglect um, the urban areas where actually people are willing to pay money,
mm,
the industrial areas where people are where would actually pay a substantial amount of money for getting just, if not 24
mm,
7 power supply, even
mm,
say 22 hours per day would be a blessing for them.
mm,
Take an example. I mean, something that I found to be odd. So I was involved in the design of, again, not going to details. It was basically an augmentation program which has been started by the government of India, of all places. How a central government is able to formulate policies which can be applied to a country of 1.4 billion people is beyond me,
mm.
especially in a technical subject like power engineering. So basically, what they had done, one of the, I mean, these are stupid things that keep on happening. So they expected the power department to come up with a estimate of a transformer capacity that you would require. So basically, the existing transformers that we have here in Kashmir, just like in many other parts of India, the distribution transformers, they are pretty large size. So a single distribution transformer can supply 15, 20, 30 homes. Whereas if you look at in the Western world, in the US, for example, you typically have pole-mounted transformers. They're quite small. They would supply maybe 2 homes, maybe 4 homes, not more than that. Now there are some economic factors uh, behind choosing this as opposed to that. So they had made the choice of replacing existing transformer fleet with these small transformers, and they committed the most basic statistical error. So now you have to compute how many transformers you require and what should be the rating of a transformer. The technical word for that is what should be the kVA of the transformer, the kilovolt ampere. So what they did was that they looked at Srinagar city, they looked at average peak demand, they divided by the number of households, and they came up with an average figure. Now, basic statistics tells us that average is not representative of a population.
Mm.
So, with the consequence that to this day, you have in because not all households consume the same amount of energy. You have
Yes.
some people who have a what's called an agreemented load. So it basically decides that it's a measure of how many appliances you have. Okay. Obviously, the greater the number of appliances that one has, the greater is the requirement of a transformer. But if you just go by this simple rough statistical estimate that you need one transformer for say 4 homes. Now, if these 4 homes are sited in a poor locality where the demand is low, the transformer will be underutilized.
Yes.
and if it is cited, if this exact same transformer is cited in an adjacent locality which is affluent,
mm,
it's likely to burn,
mm,
with the consequence that when these transformers were actually deployed, a very large fraction of burnt out in winter itself in a matter of weeks, whereas a significant portion of the fleet
mm,
is totally underutilized. Now, something as simple, it's not as if people are stupid, but there is no incentive structure built into the system where
yeah,
they would actually take the effort to go for some, you know, to hire an economist, if nothing else, to hire someone who knows how to work with data. Common sense, average is not, I mean, it's something that we learn, that we have heard in our college, but we don't actually, in this
mm,
particular instance, they didn't actually use it.
yeah,
Now again, it's not something that technology can solve, it's not something that a government program typically, the only difference that I mean, you have n number of programs that government keeps on launching. Every regime that comes into power has this habit of, you know, uh, coming up with one program after another, so it's a smorgasbord of unpronounceable names. I'm not gonna attempt them, at least. But these fundamental things, no one looks at these fundamental things. So it was at that, during this time period when I was, you know, being mugged by reality, that I discovered your write-ups in Quora, on Quora, and I found them to be fascinating. Not many of them actually dealt with the, you know, with power engineering and all that. You had many of these posts which were of a general, trying to analyze a situation from a perspective of an economist, and that's what I found fascinating. And after I got into academia, I decided to work. When I decided to go for my PhD, it was, I had decided that I don't want to work into pure technical things. I want to work in an area, power system, adjacent to power system economics. And that really, so when I went to IIT Bombay, audited a couple of courses on economics.
mm,
I didn't like many. Then I discovered this book in the library, and it was really good. I'm sure you must have heard of it. It's Principles of Economics by Mankiv, I
yes,
presume is the pronunciation.
yes,
So I tried to read it. It was very interesting. Basically, the level of mathematics required is very easy. I mean, any engineer
yeah,
can read it. You don't, there is no calculus involved.
no,
So I read through it, and it was such an eye-opening experience. In the first, I think in the first chapter itself, or maybe in the second chapter, he gives this 10 principles of economics. So people, the first principle is people respond to incentives. Uh, Explains the concept of opportunity cost in a very simple language. Uh, he then goes into the technical details in the subsequent chapters, but mathematically, it's a undergraduate book.
yes,
Then I went onwards because I like mathematics. I then read through this book. Uh, I forget the name of the book itself, but the author's name is Lowell, Lovell, I think.
yeah,
A book on mathematical economics. I think it's calculus based.
yeah,
So I found it in the library, and again, it was the same thing, but with a more mathematically mature manner. So the concept of opportunity cost, or concept of the basic economic concepts. And then I didn't stop there. I i had this hunger about learning about economics. Remember, this is after my masters, after I have
yeah,
worked in the field, after I've joined academia. So I thought that, why am I jumping directly to undergraduate economics? Let me just first of all find a book of popular economics, uh, just to, you know, have an idea of things. So basically, my credo, my motto is that if you are not able to explain something in a non-mathematical manner, howsoever complicated the concept, that means that you have not understood it. If you,
true,
I mean, mathematics is important, it
yes,
is very very important. Our language is not precise enough to explain
yeah,
uh, these things, terms which have a precise meaning, these have to be meaning rather,
yeah,
these require the language of mathematics. But mathematics is not the subject, it's not the subject.
yeah,
It is to be deployed sparingly, and especially if you yourself are trying to explain something to yourself, not as opposed to someone else. uh, my belief, at least since my undergraduate days, was that if I'm not able to explain something to myself in a visual manner, in a verbal manner, then I haven't understood it. So I started digging, and I found a couple of books on popular economics. There is one book, I think, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell,
Yes.
and
Very
I
good.
found that book. It's a good book. It's a very good book. It has. I mean, I read some of his other books. Many of his other books are a bit, I mean, out there. Some of his ideas about climate change and I don't know. But look, coming back to economics, his book on basic economics, I found it to be so good. Then I read another one of his books. It was, uh, I forget the name of the book, but it's about second order thinking. So that there is a policy, don't look at the immediate consequences or whatever is declared by the lawmakers when they are introducing a bill in parliament. You look at second order effects,
Yeah.
what's going to happen and what's going to happen. So you look at it, you construct a causal chain, and you try to imagine what's going to happen. And I really found that fascinating. I really found that fascinating. So that's what really has, I mean, had I, if I was given a chance right now, and if I, had a magic wand to reset the time, I would probably have taken the study of economics, because
Yeah.
it's really something that suits my temperament.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, it's unemotional. There are, I mean, everyone has emotions, but if you look at how certain things are explained or can be understood from the prism of economics, starting from very basic principles, people respond to incentives. uh, People have faced trade-offs. These are simple things, you can explain those things to a 10-year-old, but they explain almost everything. So my my one of the things that I always keep talking to anyone who wants to do a PhD in India in electrical engineering, or for that matter many of these core engineering fields, i would always I would always counsel them, uh, technology is important, it's very important, but it's not more important than structural reform. You can have all the technology in the world, you can have all the science in the world, you can have the most intelligent people in the world, but if the systemic factors militate against a efficient utilization of resources, then it's of no use whatsoever. I mean, take an example of Russia. um, Russia, I mean, in India at least, we don't know much about Russian history. They're ethnically white European, but the Western world does not consider Russia to be part of the West. They're Christian, they're European, because their institutions are not Western. So they have have had, I should say, I mean, the the number of prominent Russian people working in Russia
Mm.
in mathematics and physics has gone down, probably on an absolute scale as well. But if you look at, say, from the time period of say 1920s to late 1980s, so this 60-year time period, uh, you had wonderful mathematicians, scientists, engineers, economists, mathematicians, produced by what was, before the Russian Revolution, mostly an agrarian society. It did not have the levels of literacy which had been reached by the United Kingdom even in the 16th century. So it was lagging, simply if you take overall literacy as a proxy for development. It was lagging behind not the England of 1970, but the England of 1590s, of the time of Elizabeth the First. Uh, I'm sure many of our listeners would be familiar with, say, the name of Kolmogorov,
Yes.
uh, the famous mathematician who in 1930s, because of my interest in statistics and probability,
Yes.
I've heard of him. He was the one who actually gave the first axiomatic treatment of probability.
Yes.
All of us, when we take up the study of probability or statistics, many of us are working in machine learning, and at least think that they're working in machine learning. They learn something about his axioms of probability.
Yeah.
he had many other great achievements. I mean, some things I don't understand, they are in pure mathematics, but his achievements in dynamical systems, his achievements uh, um, in numerical mathematics, they are, everyone uses them in all the cutting edge software, whether produced by MATLAB, whether produced by any of these other multinational companies. His ideas are living, even though he's passed away in the 1980s. But almost none of them were actually commercialized by any Russian company. It was all developed in the West. His ideas were indigenous to Russia. I don't think he ever worked outside of the Soviet Union. He died a Soviet citizen in the 1980s. He got all his degrees, bachelor's, master's, PhD. All his students were, uh, if I'm not mistaken, Soviet, or maybe might have come from the Soviet bloc. Uh, but practical application which really has improved lives of people, it's not something that was developed in Russia. It's something
Yeah.
that actually happened in the Western world. Another person that I would like to name here would be Professor Rao of Kramer Rao theorem.
Yes.
Many of his ideas have already been utilized by all
Yes.
these companies working in deep learning, in machine learning, in data analytics. How many of these companies are Indian? I don't can't think of any.
No.
They're all in in the US. Couple of them are in France. I'm sure there must be some companies in China, perhaps a few in England, certainly some in Germany, but mostly it's in the Western world.
No.
We
And
have
in his
failed to
old age,
actually.
he moved to the U.S. He
Yeah,
did.
yeah. In his
He
old
was
age,
a
after. Yeah, yeah.
he was a professor in the U.S. and they celebrated his 100th birthday recently. He's passed
Yes,
away
yes, yes.
after that,
Yeah, he
but
yeah he
he
passed away
did.
recently.
He was a great man and a great scholar, known all over the world. His theorems are taught in econometrics and statistics all over the world.
Yes,
But in
yes,
the
yes.
end, it wasn't enough for him to be there in India. The US is very famous for grabbing people from everywhere. And they did grab him, and he was here pretty close to where I live. So let's continue.
Yeah. So I mean, another one of my interests. I mean, when I took up the study of economics, um, I was fascinated by the history of. I mean, so if you take up a textbook like Mankiev, or another textbook that I had. I mean, I just skimmed through it. I didn't read all of it because I found Mankey to be much more student friendly. I think it's by, I forget his name, but maybe you would know his name. The former uh, what's the word for it? The governor of the Federal Reserve. What's their title?
Bernanke, the
Yeah,
chairman.
Bernanke. Yeah, I think he got a
Bernanke.
Nobel Prize a couple of
Yeah.
years ago.
Yes.
Uh, I didn't like it.
Okay.
I found Mankey to be much more approachable and
Yeah.
much less pretentious.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, one, I mean, so if I read something, I want to go to the bottom of it. So, so Mankey would introduce the concept of opportunity cost, or the concept of you know there is a given good, just basic things,
Yeah.
but wouldn't give too much of historical, you know, how it historical perspective, where did it come from, how did it arise.
Hmm.
Ideas don't come fully formed into the world. I knew that already from my study of mathematics. I know
Yeah.
that what we take for granted, analysis or calculus, it was only put on firm mathematical logical footing in the 19th century, even though the techniques were invented in the 17th century. So
Right.
a full 200 years after
Yeah.
Leibniz and Newton, we
Yes.
have great men like Weierstrass and other
Yeah.
Riemann and so on and so forth, who
Yeah.
gave mathematical rigor to these ideas.
Yeah.
So come back to economics. I wanted to read about the history of economics. I didn't get what's these books were books on economics, but I was looking for some political economy, some historical understanding of why is it that something happens here in this country and not in that country? Why did the industrial revolution happen in England and not say in France? I mean, they are more or less the same countries.
yeah,
uh, why was the Renaissance, people would consider to be that to be a part of history, but that is very much a topic in economics, in my opinion. Why
yeah,
did the Renaissance happen in Northern Europe and in the city states of Italy,
yeah,
and not in Russia, not in China, not in
yeah,
Greece for that matter? I mean,
yeah,
if we claim that the term Renaissance refers to the rediscovery of the ancient ideas of the ancient Greeks, why not in Greece itself?
yeah,
There is no linguistic barrier. Why did it require their works to be translated from Arabic and Latin and Greek into Latin and then into the vernacular languages of German and French? So these things, Mankey or these other textbooks, they don't. I mean, obviously, they can't teach everything.
no,
So I started reading on historical economy, and I took up the study of. I literally opened the textbook of Alfred Marshall. I somehow managed
yes,
to get it.
yes,
I think it was published in the 1890s, and I really enjoyed it
yeah,
because he does not pretend that economics is purely a mathematical subject. He gives a human perspective, a psychological perspective of everything.
yeah,
And then I actually read up on his original papers and
yes,
some of the papers of his contemporaries, his peers, or the ones who came before him.
mm,
And they were full of insights. I really enjoyed them as well.
yeah,
And that in turn has produced an enormous interest in history, at least for me.
okay,
So, Indian economic history and uh, history of. I'm reading a book on Indian economic history by Professor Irfan Habib. He's a Marxist historian,
yes,
and every third page, I mean, he's a scholar, but
yes,
every third, fourth page, I find myself in violent disagreement with him.
mm-hmm,
His the facts that he puts forward, since I know a bit of economics, I am not an economist. I can see that no, it doesn't add up.
okay,
The interpretation is wrong. So, take another example. Just because I was trying to understand economics and history and all that, I came across this claim by, I think it's by Dr. Tharoor. I don't know who's the one who actually made it. That the British took away 45 trillion. Someone
yes,
says 40
yes,
trillion dollars. I don't know how they arrive at this figure. Apparently, I think it's Professor Patnaik,
yes,
formerly of JNU, who came
yeah,
up with that idea.
yeah,
Uh, and you look at works of other economic historians. I think Professor Roy Chaudhary.
yeah,
They don't. I mean, it's not believable.
no,
It is not believable.
no,
I mean, it maybe hides some inferiority complex in us. That okay, we are why are we poor? Why are we backward? It's because the English looted everything. But I mean, if you just approach this not from the perspective of a blind nationalist or someone
yeah,
who is,
uh-huh,
but from a logical perspective, an economist,
yeah,
these things you won't accept. No
yeah,
one would accept, even though Professor Dr. Tharoor, I should say, uh, he's a brilliant guy. But I think because of politics and all that, he was forced to come up with these ridiculous statements in that book of his. I think I forget the name,
yeah,
about the British looting of India. I mean,
yeah,
we can fault them for a thousand things, but not everything that they did was wrong. I mean, this country literally, we may not like to admit it, but all our institutions are have been bequeathed to us by the British. Um, we have to think long and hard before we actually find an institution which functions in this country that was not established by the British or was not established by us mimicking a Western model. Uh, a classical example would be railways. Okay, so in Kashmir, we didn't have railways until recently, but I know of bridges that have been built by the British in the 1920s. They still stand. There is no structural problem. You don't find any regular requirement of regular maintenance, whereas bridges that have been built in the same topography, subject to the same environmental conditions, they have a lifespan of 30 years, 40 years, and then they crumble. Uh, so, similarly, if you take the example of railways, you look at any of the uh, bungalows that the British built, or the bridges that the British built, or even the tracks, a frighteningly large fraction of the overall tracks that we have here in India date back to the British times. Before 1947, we have scarcely expanded it by a significant number. I forget what's the number, but it's probably in not more than I think few uh, dozen% or so in the last 80 odd years. They are still growing strong. We have not been able to actually achieve that level of workmanship. And who were the workers? I mean, the engineer, the person who designed it may have been a British guy, but the actual workers, they were not Brits, they were Indians. So, given the right environment, Indians excel. But the problem with us at the moment, I think it also would be applicable to use your expression to other bases, is that we don't have the right environment. Our the systems, to use that hackneyed expression, they don't work. They have the incentive structures are perverse. They produce perverse outcomes. So I don't know. I'm not a public policy guy. I have no idea whatsoever how to solve this. But I can see that whenever a politician comes up and promises that, okay, I'm gonna give, say, I don't know, 10,000 rupees per month as unemployment insurance, unemployment allowance, sorry. And I know the state of finances of our state, or for that matter of the country, the level of the physical fiscal deficit, the utter debt burden that almost all of our state governments have. I don't know how people swallow these slogans. I mean, can't they read? Can't they just? I mean, it won't take more than 10 minutes
Mm,
to look at the state of finances of any state. Take your pick. Mm, they can't be funded, or
mm.
for that matter, this ridiculous thing that, I mean, I'm a government employee. It's in my incentive. It's in my interest that the old pension scheme is brought back. For your listeners who may not be familiar with this, so we had until 2004 in the central government, and I think until 2010, 2011 in some state governments, you had what's now called the old pension scheme, which is a guaranteed pension,
Yes,
guaranteed by the employer, that's to
yes,
say the state or the central government. So a
yes,
person retires at age 58, 60, 62, 65, depending on your work, and you get half of your last pay drawn as your pension. It's index linked, so you are protected against inflation.
yes,
You every 10 years you have what is known as a pay commission. So typically your pay would double, your pension would double, and there is no time limit. So you may have retired at the age of 58 and you may live to an age of 100. So you will be paid back, probably get the benefit of four pay commissions
yes,
for 40 plus years.
yes,
And I think many economists, I think, recognized, and even before them the bureaucrats and the politicians recognized that it's not sustainable. It will bankrupt uh, the finances of the center and certainly of the states. So they came up with this new pension scheme, which is basically what we have in the Western world. You contribute a portion of your income into a pension fund. It's invested into the market. You yourself have the liberty to decide the degree to which you want your pensionary contribution to be used for speculative or high risk investment. You just want to put it in a mutual fund, okay. You want it to go to some more high risk investment, okay. And at the end of your tenure of service, you will be getting back a fraction of this corpus of money that you would have invested over 30, 35, 25, whatever it is, years. The government also contributes, matches your contribution, but once you retire, the government directly doesn't pay you anything.
right.
Now, obviously, this was introduced in 2004. No person has actually retired since then. A couple of them may have taken voluntary retirement, but to get a pension, you need 20 years of service. Um, so it actually has not percolated down into the people.
yeah,
People, obviously, uh, it has led to rumor mongers and people who just want to benefit out of it, and with the consequence that many state governments have come up with this idea of reintroducing the old pension scheme. I mean, it's in my benefit, it's going to help me, but it's going to bankrupt the state governments. Where's the money left for investment into in infrastructure, in health, in education,
oh,
in the enhancement of the power sector? You don't have infinite resources.
yeah,
Ultimately, a government can't create money out of nothing. Try to create money out of nothing, you have inflation. You have runaway inflation of the kind that you probably will see in the coming years, if you are not already seeing it in Pakistan, where the government is profligate. You have double digit inflation and have had double digit inflation for the last couple of years, and that's the official rate. I think the official rate is like 20 odd percent. The actual rate of inflation is perhaps 50%, 40%, we don't know.
yeah.
um, so
So,
yeah. uh,
by the way, Arish, we are running out of time because we have
yeah,
one
yeah.
hour allocated. It's not that I want to cut you off, but we do have only 3 or 4 minutes. So, could you just
So
wrap it up?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So to conclude, uh, as I said, my interests are in the intersection of power systems, economics, history. I do a fair bit of coding. I try to construct models of power systems. I try to model them and implement them in a computer in a computationally intensive, effective manner, efficient manner. But I also try to look at the consequences of taking this decision as opposed to that decision. What are the economic incentives created by this? And I've tried to speak a little bit about that. I hope
But
I've
let me
not,
just ask you one question. How is this
yeah,
AI going to help you?
AI,
Yes,
it's
but
already helping me.
it's already helping you.
Yeah, because coding is so much easier. So for
Okay.
example, I just go to, if your listeners would be familiar with GitHub,
Yes,
or they would be familiar with Anaconda. It's the popular distribution for Python. Now
yeah,
it has just like you have a copilot in your
yeah,
Microsoft Windows,
yeah.
or you just type in a little bit of things,
It gives
just
you
give
the
the
code.
bare bones, and it gives you the code.
Right.
Now there are some subtle bugs
Yeah,
which can be hard to find,
yeah,
but if you know your stuff, it's not difficult. But if you rely completely on it, at the
yeah,
moment at least, it's not completely reliable.
yeah.
it
Understood.
has this it has this tendency of, you know so for example, in Python, take an example, or other programming languages, there are some things that you can't do,
Yeah,
or at least you can't do it directly. But
yeah,
oftentimes these AI pilots, they don't understand. They try to come up with, some scenarios in which they don't want to disappoint. I don't know whosoever has coded them, they don't want the user to be disappointed. So yeah, that's it. It's helpful. And I think we're running out of time. I just wanted to say that this AI thing particularly, it's going to really revolutionize everything. I don't think we as Indians are ready. You know it's already impacting the employment generation by all the major IT companies.
yeah.
I mean, just read up on the latest figures. The number of jobs that they have created directly in India, it's fallen by a factor of 10.
Yes,
Because if I'm a American guy sitting in, I don't know, Denver or Texas or whatever, I need a simple kind of code. I will just type it into this copilot and I will get it. Why do I need to hire a person? Because
right.
most of the IT things that were done by these majors, they're very basic stuff. They're not
Yeah,
groundbreaking. They're
yeah,
housekeeping things. You don't need those people now. I don't think the government of India has actually come up with any systematic plan of what to do with it.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Arish. You have really covered so much ground in this one talk. Power systems, distribution, discoms, and history and economics. It's wonderful to hear. It validates my point of launching this channel that young people have a lot to say and they don't have an opportunity. So you've taken full advantage of it. We really are out of time, not because I want to cut you off, but there's a next person in 2 minutes. So let
Yeah,
me say thank you, and please send your photograph and your write-up, and then I'll post it online. It was
yeah.
wonderful to listen to you. Okay.
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right, so
Professor
let's say
Martin.
bye
Thank you.
to everybody. I'll be back with another young person or an expert or a young expert. Until then, bye everybody.